Ziggs was known as the Spear of Nature. He came from the northern grasslands of the Empire, a barbaric land where the Emperor's rule held no weight, a place where letting your guard down, even for a moment, could mean your death. He was descended from the nomads who had once wandered those open plains. By the time he was old enough to fend for himself, he was already alone. He didn't know why, he couldn't remember. It had always just been him, but somehow he survived. He traded with a nearby village, bringing in meat from his kills. He learned quickly what was valuable and what wasn't. Still, the villagers never looked at him without suspicion. Watching a wild-looking nomad dragging deer corpses through town didn't inspire comfort. They whispered about him. Some thought he might eat humans. Others wondered if he was even human himself. But one girl approached him without hesitation. She smiled and asked his name. He told her, and she laughed, not cruelly, but with joy. She introduced herself cheerfully, beaming as she explained that he looked like a wolf walking on 2 legs. In that moment, Ziggs, who had roamed the endless grasslands alone for as long as he could remember, felt something stir. A tear rolled down his cheek before he even understood why. That was the day he met Elka. And that was the day he realised he had been lonely his entire life. She introduced him to her father, who took him in at her request. From that moment on, Ziggs began learning how to live among others. He stopped being a wolf and learned how to be human. And now he was racing through the air with only one thought in mind. He had to protect her. Ziggs flew through the sky, heading straight for the library. The air roared in his ears, but his focus stayed locked on one thing, Elka. He'd heard the rumours about Ed Rothstaler, everything the boy had done before being kicked out of the dorms. The expulsion, the strange behaviour. It didn't matter whether any of it was true. If there was even a chance she was in danger, then nothing else mattered. If he had to become a beast again, so be it. He crashed through a window and sprinted down the hallway, eyes sharp, steps relentless. Then he saw him. Ed sat slouched outside the reading rooms, bruised and bloodied, leaning against the wall. He looked exhausted. Ziggs grabbed him by the collar and dragged him upright. He demanded to know where Elka was. Ed gave a simple answer, reading room 3. Ziggs let go without a word and bolted down the corridor. He slammed the door open and shouted her name. There she was, right in front of him. Asleep on the table, a coat had been draped over her to keep her warm. Ziggs rushed to her side, his hands trembling. He braced himself on the table, his forehead dropping low as he exhaled hard. She was safe. Not a bruise on her. His eyes scanned the room. Bookshelves had been dragged in and arranged around the table like a makeshift wall. The blackout curtains were pulled tight, cloaking the space in soft shadows, likely to keep the spirits from seeing inside. Then his gaze landed on the blackboard. A short message had been scrawled in white chalk. If you wake up, stay in this room and stay calm. Everything will be fine soon. It's dangerous outside. Ziggs read the words again. Someone had gone through all this trouble to keep her safe. That's when he noticed the blood. The coat was covered in blotches. Her breathing was steady. It wasn't her blood. He turned toward the door and saw the trail. Drops and smears of it leading out. It had been Ed's. Even while injured, he'd taken care of her. Why? 3 hours earlier. The library had begun to shake. Books tumbled from the shelves, crashing to the floor one after another. One of them had struck Elka on the head. She'd passed out, her body limp against his shoulder. Ed gritted his teeth. All the training he'd been doing was paying off now. He gently lowered her onto a table, then rushed to the nearest window. Outside, the sky had changed. A massive summoning circle had formed in the air above the campus. The glass can arc had already begun. He quickly closed the curtains. Taylor should take care of that, just like he was meant to. There was no need to get involved in the part of the story meant for the main characters. He needed to stay out of it. He couldn't change the future. But the danger was coming fast. Spirits would be all over the campus soon. He started dragging bookshelves, trying to secure the room as best he could. Then he paused. Spirits. He couldn't see them. Not normally, not without the right stat. In order to interact with spirits, you needed spiritual resonance or understanding, or both. But something had changed. Because of Yennekar's summoning, the dark spirits had taken physical form. That meant he could see them now, touch them, fight them. This wouldn't last. He probably wouldn't get a better opportunity than this. Ed stepped out of the room, one last glance at Elka, safe, unconscious, and warm under his coat. Then he turned away, and quietly thanked Yennekar as he went to find the spirits. Back in the present, Ed sat slumped outside room 3, resting against the wall. During the fight, he'd managed to raise a few key skills, spiritual resonance and spiritual understanding. It wasn't much, but it was progress. And maybe, just maybe, it was enough to form a contract now. Ziggs stepped out, carrying Elka on his back, still unconscious but unharmed. He glanced at Ed, then asked what he was doing there, and why he looked like he'd been through a war. Ed told him he'd been training. Ziggs stared for a moment, then let out a breath. He lowered his head and bowed, thanking him for keeping Elka safe. He promised to repay the debt. Ed didn't respond right away. He had almost forgotten how close those two were, but now that he thought about it, Ziggs was one of the main characters. He had always stayed close to Taylor, loyal, grounded, and capable in a fight. If Ziggs was here, then that meant he'd left the others behind to search for Elka. He told him to get her to safety, and then go back. Taylor would need help. Ziggs frowned. Why bring up Taylor? They'd never even spoken. Ed told him Taylor was the only one who could cut through the fire spirit's hide. Ziggs didn't argue. He bowed his head again, then turned and carried Elka away. Ed sank back down, watching him disappear down the hall. That should get things moving. The boss fight was coming soon. But something still bugged him. Ziggs had said he'd never spoken to Taylor. That couldn't be right. They were supposed to have a mock battle in about a month. Taylor lost, but earned Ziggs' respect with an elemental slash. That hadn't happened yet. Yennekar's event wasn't supposed to trigger until after that battle, but it had already started, which meant the slash skill they needed to win wasn't going to be ready in time. The story was drifting off course, too much. Ed stared down the hallway, knowing what it meant. He couldn't predict the future anymore. At the student square near the temporary outpost, Ziggs returned to the group. He apologised for being late. The students were battered from the battle, bandaged, bruised, and barely standing, but they were relieved to see him. The princess approached. She told him not to blame himself. Even if he had been there from the start, the first assault still would have failed. A knight stepped forward and addressed her. Without reinforcements, trying again would be reckless. They didn't have the numbers. She looked around at the others. Some were sitting with their heads down, others tending to wounds or broken weapons. The air felt heavy. Their morale had crumbled. She tried to rally them, tried to say something, anything to give them direction, but her voice faltered. The words just wouldn't come. Then someone called out across the square. A voice, calm, clear, and unexpected. Everyone turned. It was Ed. He walked toward the group. He hadn't wanted to get involved, but things had gone too far off track. The princess froze when she saw him. He got straight to the point. They couldn't focus everything on the fire spirit, not this time. They had to split into 2 groups before the summoning finished, and he would lead one of them. No one said a word. The group stood silent, trying to process what they'd just heard. Then Clevius broke the silence. He stepped forward and asked if Ed was crazy. Why would anyone listen to him? Before the tension could escalate, Ziggs raised an arm in front of him and told him to let Ed speak. Ed stepped forward and addressed the group. To reach Yennekar and the dark spirit Velocipede, they first had to get past the high-ranking fire spirit Takan. They'd already fought it once and barely escaped. Its hide couldn't be pierced by anything they tried. The plan was simple. One group would distract it. The other would sneak past and take on Yennekar and the dark spirit Velospa. Lortel spoke up, her voice calm but firm. This wasn't the same Takan she had fought in the arena. They were lucky to escape the first time. She said the plan was too risky. Ed didn't deny it, but if they didn't stop Yenica now, what would happen to the rest of the school? Ziggs then asked the obvious question, who would be the bait? No one answered. The silence hung in the air until one hand went up. Taylor stepped forward and volunteered. Ed told him to put his hand down. He was needed on the attack team. Taylor tried to argue, claiming he was ready to risk his life. Ed pushed him aside and said this wasn't about sacrifice. Then Ed announced the distraction team, himself, Lortel, and Clevius. The reactions were immediate. Clevius looked horrified, saying he didn't want to die. Lortel politely declined. Ed tried reasoning with them, but it wasn't getting through. Then the princess stepped forward. She backed Ed's plan. She said it made sense. And as the princess, she gave the order. The teams were decided. As the two groups moved out, she called out one final instruction. No one was allowed to die. Ed's group reached their destination near the centre square. Takan was there, still furious, still burning. Lortel glanced at Ed and asked what the plan was to distract it. Ed told her to follow his lead. As long as they stuck to the plan, they'd win for sure. The three of them charged toward the fire spirit. As they ran together, Ed turned to Clevius and said not to worry, he'd do fine. Clevius didn't look convinced at first, but then he gave a small smile and picked up speed, gaining a bit of confidence from Ed's words. He might act cowardly, Ed thought, but that wasn't the full story. Clevius was actually the top combat student from the first-year class. He just didn't believe it himself. Clevius reached the spirit first. As soon as he got close, Takan let out a deafening roar. He flinched, looked back nervously, and asked what the plan was, only to realise the others weren't behind him. Takan lowered its head to meet him, embers flaring from its mouth. Clevius turned and sprinted away, shouting that they tricked him. He shouted as he ran that he wasn't going to let them get away with it. Not far from there, Lortel stood outside, positioned beside one of the outer walls. She thought back to when they'd left Clevius behind to draw Takan's attention. She had asked if that was really his plan all along. To sacrifice Clevius? Ed said he wouldn't die. He reminded her that Clevius was the top student in year 1 and that he wouldn't go down so easily. Then he told her role was the most important. She was going to open the path for the attack team and deal the most damage to Takan. Now, standing in position, Lortel focused. She was ready. She gathered energy into her hand. Magic circles formed behind her, glowing with energy. She aimed at the wall, then fired. A massive blast tore through it, revealing the attack group waiting on the other side. They looked stunned. Lortel gave a quick smile and told them it was their time to shine. As they ran past her, she remembered something. She had done something like this before, during her duel with Yenica. She blew up the roof back then. That's why he chose her, she thought. He really was something else. Back at the square, Clevius came flying out of another doorway, still being chased by Takan and still screaming. He shouted that he wouldn't forget this betrayal. Lortel looked toward the square. She remembered Ed's last words to her, that they needed the spirit right there, in that open space. But even with Takan where they wanted it, they still had no way to break through its hide. She remembered the bag Ed was holding when he left. He said he would handle it. He said he would break its defence, then they would finish it. Ed sprinted through the halls, heading straight for the rooftop. He reached the stairs and took them 2 at a time. They couldn't break through Takan's hide. Taylor hadn't learned the elemental slash yet. That part of the story hadn't happened, which meant they needed something else, something stronger. He reached the rooftop and kicked the door open. And there she was. Lucy, sound asleep. Exactly where she always used to nap before she started showing up at his camp. He let out a breath, walked over and picked her up, slinging her over his shoulder. Still half asleep, she mumbled that she was trying to nap. Then her nose twitched as Ed opened the bag. She opened one eye and mumbled again. She caught the scent of jerky. Ed crammed a bunch of jerky into her mouth. Her eyes blinked open in surprise. but she was too groggy to react. Her cheeks were stuffed with jerky, strips still sticking out of her mouth. He grabbed the back of her shirt and crouched, lining up his aim. He told her the target was the lizard. Then he hurled her through the air. Lucy flew across the sky, cheeks puffed out from the jerky still in her mouth. The wind hit her face as she tried to yell that Ed was mean, but all that came out was a muffled noise through the food. Ed watched her sail toward the square. Takan was still locked on Clevius and Lortel, right where he wanted it. Then the impact landed. Lucy came to a sudden stop mid-air, right in front of Takan. Her eyes flashed. A surge of lightning exploded from her, slamming into the fire spirit with explosive force. The blast lit up the entire square. Energy roared outward, shaking the ground beneath them. Lortel raised a barrier just in time to protect herself, and Clevius, as the force blew them back. Even Ed had to grip the railing to hold steady. As the smoke cleared, he narrowed his eyes and looked down at the square. Takan's armoured hide had been broken. That would be enough. He turned and headed for the stairs. Now he's going to take the kill. Trapped in place by the spirit's chains, Yenneke's mind wandered. She remembered her mother telling her how proud she was, how deeply she loved her. Her friends, always encouraging, had called her the hope of the second years. Even the teachers had placed their faith in her, claiming that without her, their year would have gone down as the worst in academy history. All that pressure had built up over time, and now it had brought her here. The attack group finally reached her. Despite the ghostly chains wrapped around her body, binding her to the massive dark spirit's chest, Yenneke managed a small smile as she greeted them. Ed reached the square and found Clevius still barely avoiding Takan's relentless attacks. Lortel stood nearby, actively supporting him with spells. He asked where Lucy was. Lortel told him she went back to sleep and was now rolling around inside a protective barrier somewhere. Then she told him that even with Takan's hide destroyed, the spirit was still far too strong. Her ice spears had barely scratched it. Ed said that to finish it off, they needed to strike its neck. Her magic wasn't suited for that, so he would handle it. She asked why it couldn't be Clevius. Wasn't Ed in the magic department? Clevius used a sword. It made more sense. Ed motioned toward the terrified student still running around. Was he in any shape to do it? Lortel looked and agreed. No, he definitely wasn't. Ed told her to trust him. If she could slow the spirit down, he'd handle the rest, even if it meant putting his life in her hands. She told him that was quite the gamble. He said it wasn't gambling like betting money. He was staking his life on it, more like an investment. That got a grin out of her. She told him that was her specialty. Then she began gathering her magical power, forming ice spears as circles of energy appeared around her. She said that if he trusted her with his life, she would do the same and trust him back. Ed dashed toward Takan while Clevius finally collapsed from exhaustion. The fire spirit let out a deep roar and began gathering flames in its mouth, preparing to unleash a powerful breath attack. Ed steadied his breathing as he focused wind energy into his palm, the same energy he'd used so many times before, chopping firewood back at camp. He needed to reach the base of the creature's neck. That was the only chance. Suddenly, a massive claw pierced through the clouds above. Clevius looked up in horror. That was Glasscan's right arm. The summoning must have been nearing completion. The other team had to be close to defeating it. But that massive limb could distract anyone, and Ed quickly turned to check on Lortel. He didn't have time to check. Takan's fire burst from its mouth, only to be intercepted mid-air by a surge of ice magic shielding Ed from the flames. Lortel shouted across the battlefield. Now was his chance. Even with that monstrous claw looming above, she hadn't faltered for a moment. Ed didn't waste the moment. As Takan flinched from the deflected breath, briefly distracted, he sprinted forward. Sliding beneath its body, he lined up the shot and unleashed the full force of his wind slash. The energy tore upward, slicing clean through the weakened neck. System messages surged into Ed's view as the spirit collapsed. His experience points skyrocketed, and both his spirit resonance and understanding skills leveled up multiple times. Then one final message appeared. He had unlocked the spirit contract ability. Ed barely had a moment to process it before something caught his eye above. A figure flew toward the massive claw in the sky, surrounded by pulsing energy. That had to be Taylor. He watched as the figure closed in at lightning speed. Taylor's sword flashed with elemental power, slicing through the claw with a flurry of strikes that shattered it into fragments. The sky lit up. Then the giant summoning circle above them exploded, a thunderous shockwave rippling through the air as the last of the summoning was destroyed. As Taylor fell from above, his hair now completely white, Ed couldn't help but stare. That's the protagonist for you, he thought, always stealing the spotlight. But even he had to admit it was an incredible display. It was over. Dawn broke slowly over the battlefield. Ed, Lortel and Clevius sat beneath a tree at the edge of the square, completely spent. Lucy, unbothered as always, was sprawled on her back next to them, fast asleep like nothing had happened. Lortel sat glancing at Ed. She told him she'd met a lot of people who liked to talk big. Most of them turned out to be liars and cowards. Ed admitted she wasn't wrong. That couldn't be all he had to say, she asked. They'd nearly died back there. Then she smiled faintly and extended a hand toward him. This time, she said, she wanted to introduce herself properly. Ed shook her hand. When she let go, he looked down and found 3 gold coins in his palm. She stuck out her tongue and told him she'd won this round, and that she'd be seeing him again. Ed watched her walk off, already wondering what she was planning next. Footsteps approached in a hurry. Ed looked up to see Taylor heading toward him, his hair still completely white. Ed immediately recognised the change. That hair colour could only mean one thing. Taylor had awakened his swordmaster skill. Taylor stopped in front of him and lowered his head. Despite admitting he still didn't like Ed, and had good reason not to, he bowed even lower and thanked him. Clevius pushed himself up and shouted at Taylor not to bow to someone like Ed. He was almost killed because of him. Ziggs arrived with the others and told Clevius to quiet down, and the rest of the group seemed to agree. Clevius dropped back to the ground, covering his face with both hands. The princess stepped forward and told Ed that his actions helped save the school. She said she would inform the student council of everything he had done. Ed stood up from the tree and told her not to bother. Lucy had dealt most of the damage, and Taylor was the one who defeated both Velospa and Glasscan. Elvira peeked around from behind the princess and smirked at Ed, asking if he was avoiding praise because he was embarrassed or something. Ziggs scolded her, reminding her to show proper respect to older students. She hissed back at him, demanding to know why everyone was suddenly taking Ed's side. Ed stood a little farther back, watching them argue. He'd done everything he could to stay out of their way, to avoid getting involved. But now that he was here, seeing them all up close, after spending so long with them in the game, he couldn't help but feel something. He was really here. And even if it was just for this moment, he allowed himself to enjoy it, because he knew the future still held many dangers, and he wanted no part of them. He quietly slipped away from the group and made his way into the collapsed part of the school, carefully stepping over fallen beams and scattered rubble. In the middle of the ruined training hall stood a lone wooden cabinet, barely intact. If his hunch was right, that was the place. He walked over, gripped the handle, and opened the door. Inside, huddled in a small space, was Yenneker, bruised, scraped, and curled into a ball. She looked up at him, her eyes squinting against the faint light. Then slowly, she smiled. While the others were busy catching their breath and celebrating, swept up in the end of the fight, Ed remembered the one person still waiting to be found.